In this special episode, we pay homage to an artist who's a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, has won 7 Grammys out of 38 nominations, sold over 150 million albums worldwide, with 3 of those in the Grammy Hall of Fame. In their almost 40-year career, they've played almost 1,500 concerts, released 38 albums, have a supposedly endless vault of unreleased material, and have nonetheless remained an enigma. We're talking about the one, the only, Prince.
Oh my God, wait till fans hear this.
Listen in as we talk to the engineers who worked most closely with Prince in the studio on seminal albums across different eras of his wide-ranging career.
His level of skill set, I never saw anything like it.
There's amazing stories, pivotal moments, and behind-the-scenes insights into the work and personality of an artist very few people got to know up close and personal.
It seemed to be superhuman almost.
First up is Susan Rogers, who worked with Prince as an engineer and technician during his commercial peak, recording albums like Purple Rain and Sign of the Times. In this interview, she discusses what Prince was like to work with in the studio and on the road, his vocal recording setup, and the origins of the infamous Vault.
So where did you make the jump from being a tech to making records?
I have to thank Prince for that. I knew when I was a kid that I loved music like a fiend, and I also knew that I was not cut out to be a musician. That's just.
So you didn't study music?
No, I took music lessons when I was a little kid, like a lot of little kids. I just hated it. It just it seemed like a system that resulted, to paraphrase David Sedaris, it was like the perfect blend between sadism and masochism. It resulted in pleasure for absolutely no one.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I didn't like playing. No one liked listening to me. Yeah. We don't need to keep this up.
How did you wind up at Prince's studio?
Well, I was working I started with Audio Industries, repairing MCI consoles and tape machines in Hollywood. I was there with them for about 3 years and then went to work for Crosby, Stills and Nash. They had a studio called Rudy Records, and I was a huge Prince fan. I still love R&B and soul music. I was a big Prince fan.
But that's early Prince.
Yeah, I had seen him live a few times. I'd seen him when he'd come through town. I was just a big Prince fan. I had his poster up in my tech shop at Rudy Records.
That's a dream come true.
Well, yeah, and then the dream happened. Prince told his management, I need a technician. He was just coming off the 1999 tour, about to start Purple Rain, and he had a local guy working for him who had, I think, been a stereo salesman. But Prince said, I need somebody who really knows what they're doing. Get me someone from New York or L.A. So Cavallo, Ruffalo, and Farnoli contacted Glenn Phoenix at Westlake Audio in Los Angeles, and they said, Glenn, who have you got? So Glenn went back to his tech shop and asked the boys back there, hey, anybody want to go to work for Prince or know anyone who does? Yeah. And my dearest friend and former boyfriend, John Sacchetti from Quincy, Massachusetts, says, oh yeah, Sue wants that job. We call Sue. So that's what he called me, and he says, hey Sue, hun, your dream job is waiting for you.
That's so
Prince
great.
wants a technician. And I said, well, you damn right. You tell Glenn not to interview anybody else. That's my job. I'm getting that job.
Wow.
So Glenn interviewed me, and he knew that I knew my stuff at that point. So they hired me and sent me to Minneapolis.
That's amazing.
And it was Prince who realized that. Well, he realized a number of things because he was very quick. He liked working with women. It just so happened that I was a woman who was a fan of his music, and wouldn't have wanted to have been anywhere else in the world.
Right.
I was a woman who had listened to the same music growing up as he did. I was on the same musical street, soul, funk. I wasn't as into the Beatles, but I was definitely into James Brown when I was a little kid. So there was that. And I wasn't someone who would challenge his authority. I was not an experienced engineer. I knew how the equipment operated because I repaired the equipment, but I didn't know how to use it artistically. Right. And that ended up being perfect for him because he liked doing things his own way. Yeah. So he put me in the chair, and that's after I installed a new console in his home and fixed the tape machine, and then bammo, I was right there in the chair.
Wow.
What kind of console did you install for him?
He had bought from Westlake, he bought a whole package, and he bought this API, and he had a Soundcraft in his home studio, and so pulled that out, put the API in, and then he ended up not liking the API because the he loved the sound of it, but it was the layout of it. The EQs were way up under near the top, underneath the meter bridge, and that he was very hands-on, and he liked his EQ to be right in front,
there.
right on top of the fader. So what he ended up doing was we used that API console. We used it at rehearsal to record a lot of work before Paisley Park was built. We just recorded at rehearsal, but he commissioned Frank DiMedio to build him a custom console like the one at Sunset Sound in Studio 3 that Frank had made.
And so I have a lot of Prince questions. I'm sure he was an aggressive EQer.
Yeah, he needed an engineer. He really did need a technician. So it wasn't until he passed away that I began for the first time realizing he was lucky too. I knew how lucky I was to go to work for him, but then I realized, where the hell else is he going to find another woman who's going to like have the same musical taste as him, and just, come on, it's going to be really hard. But so I've started to think about that recently. But what he really needed was just someone to just keep current flowing, right? And to stay up with him, and that's another thing I could do is go for 24 hours, go for 48. A 48-hour day was not at all uncommon. There were so many of that. We just did it, and we weren't on drugs or anything. It was just water and caffeine and brushing your teeth, and it was the excitement. Right. Of being young and knowing that you're selling some records. People are going to be hearing this. So who wouldn't want to stay awake for that? You just want to. So he, I would route things, and I could be dialing things in. And it wasn't just me. It was Peggy McCreary at Sunset Sound, David Leonard at Sunset Sound, or other people that he worked with. You get a signal for him, and you can be dialing it in. So while he's playing bass, I know that the next thing coming up is going to be guitar, and I'm already seeing the shape of the song. He didn't say much, but if it was an up-tempo song, well, then I'll choose shorter reverbs than if we're doing a ballad. And I always gave him his usual favorites that he liked, but I'd try to slip in some new things as well, just to see what he would like.
Did he catch that stuff and kibosh it, or was he open to stuff?
He preferred to work. He preferred to work as wordlessly as possible, except at the very end when a song had kind of turned the corner and he knew what it was going to be. So if he didn't like something, he wouldn't say anything. He would just try it out, and then he just wouldn't use it.
Right.
So I can dial things in for him, and then at the very end of the mix stage, he would dial things in for himself. And if he likes it, he uses it. He would ask me to patch things for him, and they'd be there if he wanted it, or he'd just get rid of it if he didn't.
Was there any live tracking, like band?
Yeah, a lot of it. So he liked to, whenever the guy was awake, he wanted to have an instrument in his hands. If he wasn't on the phone taking business calls, and he always made those really short so that he could get back to making music, which meant that if we were home in Minneapolis, there'd be rehearsal during the day. So we would rehearse at the warehouse, and at the warehouse, this is before Paisley Park was built, he had a riser against the back wall, and on the riser was drums and the two keyboards, Matt Fink and Lisa. And then he, Prince, and Mark Brown on bass and Wendy on guitar would just be right there on a piece of carpeting on the floor. And there we are. That's the studio. We did a lot of recordings that way, where he'd get the basic track from the band, and then the band would go home, and he and I would stay there at the warehouse and finish it up. Sometimes, though, we'd just take the tape and we'd just go up the street to his home studio, because he had a home studio as well. So we either finish it up at home or right there.
It's amazing the energy of someone obsessed is maybe not the right word, but compelled to do nothing other. And, I did this, I worked on it was actually a movie. Actually, Pete worked on it with me. And this guy, Adam Levine, from Maroon 5, he came in and he told the story of, he went to see Prince in L.A., do a show, and the show went on forever. And then they took him backstage and said, we're going to introduce you. And he was like flipping out. So he met Prince. And then he said something like, just casually, like maybe we should play sometime. And Prince is like 1 o'clock in the morning. Prince says, well, when?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, whenever you want. He goes, where do you live? And he lived somewhere in L.A. And they sent a little truck over with his gear. This is like 3 a.m. With his gear. his guys from his band, PA system, just moved it into Adam's house, and they played till like noon the next day.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That was so typical of him when we were on tour, whether it was the Purple Rain tour or the Parade tour. We'd be on tour, and he loved playing so much that as soon as we could get sound through the system and the riggers were done doing their thing and they've hauled the lights up, as soon as he could start playing, he wanted to play. So they would, if he could get in, we'd start playing at 2:00 in the afternoon, and he'd sound check for 4 hours, work for a little bit on the set, maybe change this or that, but for the most part, just playing, just new stuff, and just playing just for the fun of it, and doing a lot of James Brown and just, whatever you feel like doing. He'd have to let the opening act sound check for half an hour between 6 and 6:30. That's when
probably.
right. So then there's the dinner break. Opening act comes on at 8 or 8:30, probably 8:00, whatever it was. Play for half an hour. Prince and his band take the stage, play for 2.5, 3 hours, and then he would leave the stage. The final song would always be Purple Rain. He'd walk off the stage, get into his car, go to the hotel to shower and change and do one of two things. The night is young. Now it's midnight. He's either going to play an after party at a little club that we've set up in advance, or we go to a recording studio.
Right.
Because now it's time to work.
Right.
You've just been playing, for 10 hours and in front of 20,000 people, but now let's go have some fun. And he'll either play, doing whatever he wants in a little club, or we would go to, I'd have, back in those days, no internet, but I'd have a big directory of studios around the country. If I knew that he wanted to go into a studio after the show, call somebody and say, can we get in at, at midnight? Yeah. And have the room for the next day, until we have to get on a plane or in the bus to go to the next city. Right. So we would work all night. Wow. He would sleep on the plane or we'd sleep on the bus for a few hours and start all over again. That's just how he was, and so happy about it. Like that was just the thing he wanted to be doing. Yeah. When we were in the south of France doing the Under the Cherry Moon movie, we had the Advision mobile truck from London, England. He hired the mobile truck to just be parked on the movie set in the south of France, so that when they were taking their 2-hour lunches, he can go in the trunk and we can just work. Right. He'd have me mixing or doing edits while he's there shooting scenes for the fun of it.
Unbelievable.
We won't see another one like him.
Right.
It'll be a long time. There are people who work as many hours, but they're not as productive.
Right.
For him to have so many ideas, just illimitable energy coupled with a deep well of creativity and original thought.
A joy of it, apparently, right? Just like...
Was there time for him to listen? Was he an avid listener of new records, or did he just stay in his zone?
As a matter of fact, when I joined him, he did listen. And when he found a record that he liked, he would play that record to death, and he'd tell us about it. Right. I remember when I first joined him in August of '83, he would put on repeat the Culture Club album.
Oh, awesome.
And he especially loved Karma Chameleon. He loved a good pop song. Loved a good pop song.
Not a surprise.
Yeah. He loved the Cars. He loved Whitney Houston. He talked about her, like what a great singer she was. And he loved Kate Bush, and it's well known. He loved Joni Mitchell. Right. And he loved Mahler. When he was like a lot of great musicians, music was just food for him, and he had a great deal of respect for musicians whose work he liked. He didn't talk much about people who imitated him. I don't think they were really a threat to him. A big thing to him that was important, that fueled him a lot, was his competition with Michael Jackson.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I think on some level he really valued that.
You mean that was a little bit of a
motivation,
fire?
Yeah, and how fun is that? Like, think about it. If you move to a small town with let's say you're a great chef, and you move to a town that only has fast food restaurants, and you've got the only nice restaurant in town, you can lower your standards. You don't have to work that hard because you have no competition. Right. But if right across the street
is the king of pop,
the king of nice restaurants in small towns, you're going to up your game. And when you do, if that restaurant across the street ups theirs, you're going to up yours even more.
That's amazing.
So, of course, those guys are going to compete.
The Beatles and the Beach Boys, they kept raising the bar.
I think you kind of do it with a smile. Like, think of sports as well. Who'd want to have an unbeaten record, really.
Right.
Don't you want competition? Don't you want to go on the field knowing that this guy could beat me today?
Did they have a personal relationship?
I saw them together a couple of times. I don't know the extent to which you'd call it personal.
Right.
I was in the room a few times when they had conversations, and I was there at the Hollywood soundstage when Michael came down to try to talk Prince into singing on the Bad album with him. And I saw them play ping pong together.
Nice.
But I don't know. I think they both knew the value to each other was in their rivalry, and that they were competitors.
Right. And Michael obviously was a couple of years older.
I know, they were the same age.
They were the same
They were born
age.
in the same year.
Oh, no
yeah.
kidding.
So I was born in 56. Prince was born, I think it was 57. No, 58.
Yeah.
And I think Michael was as well. In fact, Prince was just 2 months older than
Right.
Michael.
I guess I thought that because Michael's career started when he was so
so
young.
That's
much,
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Yeah.
Did Michael's career start? When did Prince start becoming Prince?
He started hanging out at Owen Husney's studio when he was about 17 years old.
Right.
But prior to that, he had been woodshedding, writing songs
So he also started very young.
He started playing young.
Amazing. I'm exhausted just thinking about what you went through.
Yeah,
No, it was,
exactly.
it
I'm
was
sure
pretty
it was
great.
joyous,
it was
but-
pretty great. It was. I refer to it as a tour of duty because, of course, I had no personal life, and one of the biggest dilemmas was laundry. Because if I did have a few hours off, it's like gambling. You're thinking, all right, I think he's on a date, and he's been seeing this person for a while, so he's probably going to be out late. I can put in a load of laundry, and I can look at your watch. I've got enough time. I can get it out of the dryer. But if that stuff would go in the wash, and he'd call.
phone ring.
Yeah, and it was always that monotone voice. Susan, we need to work.
Oh my God.
What are you going to do? You know, I was living in a condo, so it's a communal washing machine. You either leave it there or you put it, you just put it in a plastic bag and come home 48 hours later.
Yeah, and it's all moldy and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a tour of duty for sure.
And did you have a very intimate working relationship? Did you have a personal, did he hang, or did he, when work was over, he went his own way?
He almost never didn't work.
Right.
So he was always working. It's not like he had friends come over and hang out. There was he became friends with Miles Davis. And I remember one night when Miles came to dinner, and Prince and Prince's dad and Miles had dinner. And even then, Prince invited his dad to kind of be a go-between. Prince was naturally reticent, shy, and extreme workaholic. And he deliberately, especially because he got signed to a deal so young, he sacrificed a personal life that was in order to have a professional life with that level of output. Right. So he signed away his rights to a personal relationship. So and then I too was someone who had my dream job and wasn't interested in having a personal relationship with him because I was so lucky to have the damn job.
Right.
So that voluntary construct, when you've got a job and you're happy with it, or you've got an employee and you're happy with this employee, you be you, I'll be me, and we'll go along quite nicely, and we're happy with our arrangement. Right. So I always had a very professional relationship with him. I cherished that it was like that. I'm sure he must have as well, because that served his needs. Right. The times when he would talk and we would get personal, he was always leading. It started and stopped at his whim. Right. And I was, just the right-hand person who would say, yeah, that is interesting. Or I didn't offer up too much of myself. He knew enough about me just so it wouldn't be awkward. He knew enough about me to know some major events from my life, but he didn't need to know anything more.
Interesting.
How many years were you with him?
It was over 4 years. It was going on 5. And we finally had opened the doors of Paisley Park Studio. So now we could have more than one studio. We can have a team of engineers. And at home, it had been, prior to Paisley opening, it was just me. So it was just me.
So,
and now we've got the great Sal Greco as chief tech, and we've got a facility, and it was a good transition point. It was time for me to go and have a life, and move back to LA.
But it's similar to like the story of Jeff Emerick, who was a kid at T-Boy, and they threw him in his first session, and it was the Beatles.
Right.
So, in a way, you went from being a technician, walking into the recording studio, and he was your first gig.
That was my first real client. Yeah, I had done some assisting before, but the very first tape he had me put up was Darling Nikki.
Wow.
And the first thing he had me do was set up a vocal mic. Jill Jones was going to be coming over to record, and so he had me set up a vocal mic, and I remember thinking, oh my God, the engineer's going to walk in, whoever this engineer is, he's going to walk in and see the tech putting up a vocal mic, and I'm just going to have to tell this person, don't be mad, Prince told me to do this. And I'm setting up the vocal mic, and I'm thinking, oh God, does he want me to get a level on it? Like, what am I supposed to do? When he had me put up, the first time he had me put up Darling Nikki, I pushed, he said, just get a rough mix. And I said, just pushing up the faders and realizing, oh my God, wait till fans hear this. Right. Oh, and I aborted my own story, but back to the microphone, there was no engineer showing up, and I'm thinking this guy's late or something. And finally, Prince came down, and I asked him, well, who's going to record it? And he said, you.
That's amazing.
Yes, sir. The vocals was one thing he insisted on doing completely alone. I would set him up. You'd route the vocal chain. You get him, label the patch cord with a piece of white tape so he knows to move it if he's going to do backing vocals. Right. Get him his sound, and then you leave.
Did he have a choice mic?
Yeah, he liked the U47, the big old U47. Right. Unless
the tube mic.
Yeah, the big tube mic. Unless we were at rehearsal, and then he'd just take his stage mic, which was a Sennheiser, the D330. Yeah, is what it was.
And did he like compression?
Now, with compression, I usually would patch the LA2A for some limiting.
Right.
I tried to kind of go easy with that, but even when that would clip, you'd get that Sly Stone sound that I just loved. Yeah, when that thing distorts, I love that. It just sounds so gospel. It just sounds so soulful. Right. I had to be really careful with headroom because Prince had such an incredible dynamic range. Right. But like any experienced singer, he understood his own dynamics, and he just worked the mic. He didn't rely tremendously on compression. It was important to capture his breaths. The breath, the inhale and the exhale conveys so much information. Just subtle information, and we get the subtext from how much air is still being expelled at the end of a vocal line. Right. I didn't know that in any way other than intuitively, but it was important.
Most people try to duck that stuff. The fact that he was into that as part of music and as part of his voice. Were you nervous?
I think nervous might be too strong of a word. I was really eager, really eager. This was my dream come true. And I kept that feeling the whole time I was with him, of just realizing how lucky I was to be with this guy hearing this music. I just still remember that feeling of wait till the fans hear this. Right. Every time we would put something new up.
So he'd do vocals alone. Would he punch?
Yeah, he would, but I could usually hear him on the other side of the door, so I know how much of it was
So you would
punched
sit right
in.
outside.
Yeah, in case he called me, and the stuff you'd hear coming from the door.
Wow.
But see, Prince he would have the one track, so if he made a mistake, he'd roll back, and he wouldn't just do a tight punch. I assume he would just do
like
a whole verse or a whole chorus or something, but so often it would be one pass, and then you'd hear him doing the backing harmonies.
Wow.
What amazed me, perhaps more than anything else, is how often I would come in and I'd see the mic in front of the chair in a sitting position. And you'd realize he had done a lot of that stuff sitting down.
That's incredible.
Which is, that always amazed me.
I know, but if you're working 24-hour days.
Yeah, he must be exhausted.
He was probably exhausted.
Surprised he wasn't laying down at a certain point.
So through those years, that I assume he recorded so much that there's a vault of unreleased. Yeah. And all this material.
I know the material that existed before I came to work for him, for the most part, unless there were some unknown pieces. And I know the material that happened during my time with him up until 87. I've been asked about the vault, and I responded to a question a few years ago with a statement that became a little bit of a soundbite. But this was in 2014, before Prince passed away. A journalist in London asked me, do you know about the vault? And I was surprised by the question, and I said, I started the vault. The word vault implies that it's, Al Capone, or that there's treasure in there and that it's secret. Vault implies secrecy. Yeah. There was nothing secret about it. It was literally a vault, because there was a big
room.
There was a bank vault door with the round wheel and the big complicated combination, and the door of the vault is about a foot thick because it served as a storm shelter in Minnesota, because you get tornadoes there. Right. But the better word for it would be closet. It was the tape closet. Right. Yes, and the reason we started a central storage facility is because he just had tapes scattered. They might be at his house or at the warehouse, or they'd be at Sunset Sound. I needed to know where everything was in case he asked me for anything. So we started putting them all in one place and starting a database to keep track of all the titles.
Did he start stuff and not finish, or he always...
Sometimes there's a lot of stuff that ended up in the vault. Most of it is finished and mixed. A lot of it is, a healthy portion of it was unfinished. So if he was unhappy with something he was doing, he'd hold up 3 fingers like a W, and that was, the W meant weak. So if he held up 3 fingers to his band or to me, it meant weak. And he would sometimes tell me, put a W on that box and circle it. Weak. This is no good. Right. But that was pretty rare. Usually he would finish things. I have a personal thesis that the reason some songs ended up in the vault and not on albums had everything to do with the lyric content and not with the musical content. Right. So there's a lot of music that has been officially unreleased that is every bit as good musically, melodically, harmonically, rhythmically, as good as anything he's ever released. But lyrically, he would choose what he wanted to say on an album, like any artist does. Like, this is going to be my statement. This is the statement I'm going to support. This represents my view of the world, or my view of humanity, or myself today. And there has to be a consistent theme. Prince made albums, not singles. He made albums. So things that would go in the vault would be things that just were contrary or didn't complement the album.
Right. Was he into gear? Like, did he care about?
He cared passionately about what he liked. Right. So if he liked something, whether it was a guitar or it was a signal processing device or a console, he was firmly committed to it. This past April of 2017, I was invited to be a participant at a Paisley Park event, and I got to see the studio for the first time. I should say studios, A and B, for the first time since the early 90s. Wow. They were unchanged. Wow. Same consoles, same Studer tape machines, the outboard gear, the Pultecs, the Eventides, the Lexicons, the stuff that he had then. Still the Lexicon 480L there. Right. He liked that stuff. Yeah. Right. And that's what he kept using. Like a lot of audio engineers, very brand loyal. Right. And if he likes it, he likes it. He doesn't see any good reason to change. Yeah. And the same thing with his guitar amps. The Mesa Boogie head, the bag end cabinets, same guitars. That's what he liked. Oh, and he had some new additions to his guitar pedal board. There were a few fancy new things, but it was the same basic Roland Boss pedals that he was using in the 80s. Wow. He liked them.
So he had that famous custom guitar. Did he, in the studio, did he always play that, or did
the cloud guitar? No, it didn't sound as good. He liked for recording. He liked that Hohner, the Telecaster copy. That was his main guitar. Really? He loved that guitar. And sometimes he'd pick up the cloud guitar and play it, but I think maybe it was the action of it. I really don't know. But it definitely didn't sound as good as that Hohner. That Hohner was his thing.
Right. But did he love the Hohner for the feel, or was it a?
Might have been both. And when I worked with him, he used 11-gauge strings. Really the thick stuff.
Yeah, that's thick, right?
Yeah, really thick. And Wendy Melvoin told me that later in his life, as we get older, we don't have the same physical dexterity, and so he ultimately went to thinner strings. But yeah,
that's interesting because he bent pretty far.
He loved that. He said he admitted that his guitar idol was Santana. At Paisley Park Studios, there's a long wall and long hallway that features a mural that Prince commissioned before he died. And it's a picture of Prince, and then to his left and to his right are the artists who he worked with and the artists who inspired him. And right next to him is Santana.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Santana was a big
He
inspiration.
was also a Mesa Boogie guy.
Yeah, maybe that's why Prince chose Mesa Boogie. Yeah.
We interviewed Susan in Gear Club episodes 22 and 23, where she discussed her work as a technician and engineer, her career in academia, and her book, This Is What It Sounds Like. Be sure to check it out at gearclubpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Sylvia Massey worked in the studio with Prince in the Diamonds and Pearls era while on staff at Larrabee Studios and has some incredible stories from her time with him. Listen in as she talks to John and Stewart about an artist who was as prolific as he was unpredictable.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And are you here specifically for AES?
I am. I was actually invited by the Women's Audio Mission to come out and
Fabulous.
do a panel with them that I did earlier this year about Prince, working with Prince, because I worked with Prince for 3 years, and there's 3 other women, and we all sit on a panel and talk about our experiences working with Prince.
Susan Rogers.
Susan Rogers and Peggy Noonan.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
It's a fun conversation. We all each have our own perspective because we worked with Prince during different eras. Like Peggy worked at the very beginning, and then Susan did Purple Rain, and then I worked with him around at the time of Diamonds and Pearls. And
But different. So as he changed, the studio experiences were different. He was different in the studio.
absolutely. Apparently, I had the raciest of all the stories
Oh,
because
boy.
he.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a lot of good stories
Yeah, I
about
bet you
Prince.
do.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun. Well, no, I can't say it was fun. It wasn't fun.
Was it high pressure?
A high pressure,
Yeah, it
and
must have been.
he was not very nice. To be honest, it was demanding, but he did reward you with the hard work that you did,
Right.
In other ways,
Right.
not personal praise,
Right.
because it was not his nature.
So from a day-to-day session, you would not feel like you didn't know if it was going well, or
You never knew if it was going well, and you would only guess. You were waiting a lot of time just for him to show up, and there was no communication between him and any of his staff.
so there's a lot of sitting around.
A lot of sitting around. Everyone's wondering what the hell's going on.
That only adds to nerves.
Yeah,
right?
and then there's these are very late days too. So you wind up it's 3:00 in the morning, and finally the manager calls you and says, "Yeah, you can go home now. Prince is in Paris." So, yeah. So yeah,
We
but
just realized Prince is in Paris.
yeah. But you know what? It was these times I'll never forget because there were sessions when it was him and me in the studio together, and he was playing all the instruments. He would turn around and grab a guitar, and I would have it in record, and he would play solos effortlessly, spinning on his heels. Dancing, and it's me and him, and it's like having my own private Prince show.
And we're
It
talking
was-
analog, right?
Oh yeah,
On tape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So it was a special time.
And did he sing? Did he? He
Never-
sang by himself, right?
He would only sing by himself. So when I was engineering for him, I would set up the room so that after the bed tracks were finished, that he would do the vocals on his own. And he was a fantastic engineer and layered all the backing vocals and harmonies. And
That's amazing.
yeah, he's really something else. And it's a shame that he's gone because. But I'll tell you what, there's archives of music that has not been released that could be continually
Right.
new music coming out by Prince probably for the next 30 years.
Right.
I mean,
So-
there's so much
So
music.
he just didn't record like I'm going to make a record. He just recorded and recorded and recorded.
Always
All the
recorded.
time, yeah.
Right.
And in fact, at the time I was working with him, there were 4 studios that he was going from
In
between.
Paisley Park.
No, I was in L.A. at Larrabee.
Oh.
So there were 2 rooms at Larrabee, and then there were another 2 rooms at the record plant that he had booked, an engineer in each room. And in each room, every day, he would, from beginning to end, write, record all the vocals, mix 2 songs per studio every day from scratch. So 8 songs a day
Including
for
writing.
20 years. Yes, for 20 years.
And he played the drums too.
He would, but when I
machine?
worked with him, it was a lot of drum machine. But he would play the drum machine with one hand without quantization. So the thumb was the kick, and the index was the snare, and the pinky was the hat. And he was playing it live. With the right hand, he would be playing the bass line on a keyboard. Unbelievable. So
And you were just
I got
there
I got to
going.
witness
Yeah.
that. But yeah, it was not an easy job. And the other engineers would say the same.
Yeah, we talked to Susan for a while last year, and she pointed out a lot of
Yeah.
interesting things. That but I've heard so much about him now over the years since he's passed away that you kind of realize he was just so above everybody else in a way, right?
He seemed to be superhuman almost,
Right.
but
Even in his
apparently
energy,
he was
right.
mortal after all.
Right.
Yeah.
But Lisa Chambliss is the fourth of the 4 women who will be speaking on these panels, and she worked with him in the very last part when he was at Paisley Park, and she has a different perspective too. He became, quote, religious, and there was a whole different vibe. So there's different, and you can recognize it in his music too, I think. Yeah.
Would he let people be involved in mixing?
Yeah, I mixed several tracks.
You did?
Yeah. But the hits that you hear, like on the album Diamonds and Pearls, some of that was done by Keith Cohen. Keith Cohen mixed a lot, and I was Keith's assistant. So sometimes I would be assisting Keith, and other times I would be engineering for Prince. I kind of took different roles, and sometimes Prince would have me mix things too.
Would he be present for the mix, or you'd mix and
I'd
send
mix.
it to him?
Well, there wasn't any sending because
Right.
we were mixing 2 cassettes,
Right.
basically, just for
Right.
reference, and then 2 half-inch after that,
Right.
ATR. But I have a couple of funny stories about all that.
Let's hear.
Okay, so let's see. So there was one time when we were doing the Diamonds and Pearls record, and I was assisting for Keith Cohen mixing the song Get Off. And now Prince was so prolific that he would finish an album, the album would be mastered, but the label would say, we're not releasing it because you just put out an album 4 months ago. We don't want to compete against that. So give it a chance. Well, he couldn't wait, so he was constantly updating the album that was finished with new songs because he couldn't help himself. So he wrote the song Get Off, and I didn't like that song. Personally, I thought the record was brilliant and it should just stay the same, but he wanted to take off some songs and replace with these new songs, and Get Off was one of them. So I'm sitting in the back of the room while Keith Cohen's mixing, and my job is to patch cables or whatever is needed, and Prince is in the room. And so I sit in the back of the room when I'm assisting, and I bring out my journal and I jot down a few things in my journal. And I think that day I really didn't like that song, and I can't express that. I would never say that to Prince. But in my journal, I can say whatever I want. So I'm like, there's Prince sitting on his purple throne, and he's taking a perfectly good record, and he's ruining it with this song, Get Off. It's not a good song. And I'm just venting onto the page.
Spoken like a true producer, by the way.
Yeah, right. In private, though. Yes. So, and then Keith says, hey, can you patch in this thing? So I put the book down and go over to the patch bay, and then I hear Prince saying out loud, there's Prince sitting on his purple. Yeah. He picked up the book and he started reading it out loud in the room. And I was so terrified. He read the whole passage, and then I grabbed it out of his hand and I thought, oh my God, I'm so fired. But he started laughing.
Right.
And at that point, our relationship changed. He became much nicer.
Right.
And then they ultimately even offered me a job to move to Paisley Park and be on staff, which I turned down.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that because
It's a little fucked up reading someone's journal.
Well,
Oh, he's Prince.
He's Prince.
Yeah.
Oh, that gives you... Oh,
It'd be fucked up if I read her journal, but Prince reading it, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. There's another fun story, though. Do we have time for that?
You do whatever you want.
All right. So I'm mixing. I get to mix some things for Prince, too. He kind of gave me a tape. He says, make a good mix of this. Or he didn't even say make a good mix. He just said mix this. Okay, so I spend the whole day making this mix. And it's like a kind of a long song, about 7 minutes long. And it's one of those really sexy songs that he was known for, like, oh, baby, tonight, we're going to do it, We're going to do it a lot of times or whatever, however he was singing.
That's pretty sexy.
Yeah, super sexy. But so I spent all day working on it, and I wanted to get it just perfect. So I kind of had to stop myself at one point, because at one point a mix doesn't get better. It gets worse. So I stopped, and Prince wasn't there yet. And so I just sat down outside the studio, and I waited. And I waited for a couple hours at least before Prince showed up, busting through the front door of the studio with a girl. And he was heading right to the studio, and I was like, oh, good, I get to play for him, and I follow him in there and go over there and get ready to play it. And he says, no, I got this, thank you. I don't need you. I'm like, okay. So I sit outside the door, and I can hear through the door that he's playing the song. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, he's going to love this mix. But then I realized, after the mix ended and another 5 minutes went by, I was like, what the hell?
It's a different version?
No, it was the same version, but what are they doing in there?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, sexy song. It's a sexy
Oh,
song.
boy.
So then they come busting out of the door. The hair is all messed up, clothes are all messed up, and they just walk out the front door. Not a word. Not a word.
Well, I guess the mix
that was
worked.
Right. It worked. Exactly.
I guess so. And that's the whole
Yeah,
the whole
that's
reason.
amazing.
Yeah.
No, seems like such an intense. Just
So-
every moment is intense,
so he
right?
came-
It's just
Very
crazy.
much.
So he came to LA to work specifically. Did he ever work in New York?
I'm sure he did.
I mean, remember, the vibe with him was he worked everywhere, even when he was on tour.
Right.
He would just, after the show, find a studio.
He
work
couldn't
in-
help himself. He was so
Right,
prolific.
Right.
And was there ever any socializing? Or he just would leave the studio and
He
that
would
would be it?
he would go clubbing. Yeah, he would show up, but
But he wouldn't invite people who
no,
were
I was the
working with-
help. You know,
Yeah, right.
we were the help, and that's okay. I know my
what
role.
you're there for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, difficult person to get to know.
Sylvia was our guest in episode number 67, where she discusses mixing, gear, and her amazing studio, The Audio Shop. Available at gearclubpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Chuck Zwicky was on staff at Paisley Park, Prince's Minneapolis studio, recording and mixing with Prince in the late 80s. He discusses how he came to find himself at Paisley Park and describes Prince's unparalleled work ethic and stamina in the studio.
So then the Minneapolis upbringing, is that how you kind of met or got into the Prince camp? Was that?
That was a fluke. I was working at this studio that I'd helped build, and one of the artists I worked with, this extremely talented multi-instrumentalist guy, he was blind, and he'd write these amazing songs, and I'd hear these tracks, like, who did this? Oh, who engineered it? Well, he did. The blind guy mic'd his own drums, played live, played all the instruments. Then the studio got rid of this console they had with VUs and got one with LED, meters. And that bummed him out, because what he used to do is he'd set up some instrument and he'd turn off all the monitors and he'd turn up the mic pre until he heard the thing banging.
Click.
And then he'd turn it back down a little bit, a couple dB.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then these LED meters, there was no, and I'm like, well, we can wire up a beeper, or something. And then we're like, oh, they still have this 16-track machine with VUs. Just listen to the machine, put it on record, So he told me, hey, I understand they're building a studio. Prince is building a studio. Like, I'd love to go out there. And I'm like, well, really? That's cool. So let's go out there. So we drive out there. And I'm looking at this place, and it's under construction. There's nothing happening. They broke ground. They built the building. And I'm looking at it going, I've built a lot of studios. So I asked the studio manager, I said, hey, it looks like you guys are kind of in the thick of it. Do you ever need any help getting this done? And they said, well, what do you mean? Like, you should talk to the chief engineer, a guy named Sal Greco. So I go on and meet with Sal. Now, Sal, if you don't know Sal, he used to be...
Susan was talking about him.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sal was the chief engineer at Electric Lady. and he got stolen away to build this studio for Prince. And I talked to Sal, and he was like, just straight up, guy from Queens, really direct, very intelligent, but and he just like, he goes, so did you see the ad? I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, well, we put out this ad, and he goes, we got a stack of resumes here from people. He goes, do you have a resume? And I said, no. He goes, can you make one? So we just talked for like 10 minutes, walked around the studio, and he calls me. He goes, you got to send me in a resume. I'm like, okay, I'll send it in. He goes, I gotta interview all these people. He goes, but there's a stack of resumes. He goes, nobody knows shit. He goes, you're the only person I've talked to who really understands how this is. When can you start? I'm like, oh, really? So I'm going back, and I'm at this studio in Minneapolis working with that same girl punk band, and this issue of Mix magazine comes out with this picture of this big SSL, and it says, Paisley Park Studios. And the girl in the band's like, do you think you could handle working on a board like that? And I said, I'm starting next week.
Yeah.
She's like, really? So that kind of worked out. And, we finished up the studio, and I met a lot of really interesting people. They had hired Joe Blaney. You know Joe?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because, another Electric Lady guy.
Yeah.
To come in and mix this record called Love Sexy with Prince. And at one point, Joe walks out of the control room, Studio A, and he goes, nobody can mix this record but Prince.
Right.
He goes, it's 24 tracks. There's 5 instruments on every track.
Right.
There's no SMPTE. There's just no automation. There's nothing. But they managed to get through it,
Right.
And but Joe is a super cool guy that took the time to just sit with me and talk, like we were pals. And I'm like, holy shit, you're from New York. Like I always dreamed of living in New York, but I was afraid if I went there, I was going to get, chewed up and spit out. And,
right. From what I remember about knowing Joe back then, he seemed like your atypical New Yorker.
More your Manhattan, West Village type New Yorker.
Right.
He's very,
Right.
very chill. And he always wore like black turtlenecks. And
Right.
I think he got gray hair when he was 12.
Yes. Yeah.
He's
That
that
was
guy.
amazing. It's so funny.
From that record.
Yeah. So did you cross paths with Susan?
I did meet Susan. She came in the studio one day when Prince and I were working, and she brought the Wendy and Lisa record she'd done. This is a story. This. I learned a lot from Susan. The first session there, everybody was filling my ears. Okay, you can't do this, you can't do this, you got to do this. And I get in there, and I hate to say it, he's like a normal guy from Minneapolis who just works really hard.
Right.
And we got along really well, and cracking jokes, but his main thing was, he works harder than anybody.
Right.
And the name of the game there is don't get in his way. You're not going to have a conversation with him about microphones.
Right.
Did he care? Was he
I would
technically-
introduce him to things. Like I always like, you show up hours early, and I'd always try to get something special going. Like he always liked to have the aux sends on the SSL or the DiMedio, to be the same. He'd like a harmonizer on send 1 and what he'd call an echo, a reverb, on that. And I always set up something special. Like I'd always take like a PCM 70 and create this concert hall that just kind of moves and shakes. And occasionally we'd be mixing, and I just put this up, and you go, wait, what is that? But he didn't really care about the technology. If he noticed it, you were in trouble, right? If something got in his way, and he'd have his moments. He'd fuck with you constantly. Like one point, we're tracking, and he's got his hands on the console, and he's like, "Where's the bass?" I'm like, "What do you mean? We just tracked it?" And he goes, "No, where's the bass?" And I'm looking at the Studer, like the meter's going. Bass is always on track 9, right? Look at the SL, the meter's moving. I'm like, oh. I lift up his hand and I push the fader up.
Right.
That's the kind of shit he would pull. And once, he realized you weren't shaken by that, it's like you were in. It was like...
Yeah.
So one of the tricks is the bass is on track 9.
That's
how we made his
That's
record.
how I made all those records, right?
Fucking great.
Everything I did with Prince was on tape. And we would slam that 2-track, and it was...
And was he... so was digital... What was Pro Tools, or wasn't really happening yet?
No, it was all 2-inch.
Your
You said it
guess...
was 89, right? 90 or something like that?
Yeah, late 80s was.
So would you have guessed that he would have made the leap or stayed?
He did. He went to
He did?
Pro Tools, and he went to, and it was a problem because he's used to sort of hitting things hard, and
here,
Right.
that
Right.
Studer 48-track digital machine was not, his friend, and Pro Tools and all that. And, the records sound a little weird. It's not a Prince record. Apparently when he sent Little Red Corvette to mastering, they returned it and said, this is unmasterable. I mean, those views were slammed the whole time.
Right.
And he just sent it back. That's the mix.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah. Master it.
Yeah, master it.
For more from Chuck, listen to episode 37, where he talks about converters, hybrid mixing, and his recording ethos. Available at gearclubpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Joe Blaney worked with Prince at Paisley Park, recording and mixing tracks for Lovesexy and the Black Album. He talks to John and Stewart about getting to know the pop icon, how Prince got his signature sounds, and his bizarre but successful audition to be Prince's engineer.
Of the 80s music, of all the music made in the 80s, to me, the artist who just stands way above everyone else is Prince.
Yeah.
You know, this guy had a level of virtuosity with guitar, bass, piano, and singing that was as good as anyone who was supposed to be the specialist at that. You know, like he could do those four, and drumming almost as good as a top drummer. You know, he was like, this guy worked harder than anyone ever before him. The thing that was interesting about him is he never really bought into the sequencing thing and stuff.
It's funny, you would think that he would have,
right,
and that his records were based on that, but no, he was a player.
He's played. He could play One of the reasons I think he's so fresh, he's one of the first guys to use the Lindrum and embrace it, but that was the only mechanical part of it. So he didn't do the thing where you could program a song. You could either put 2 or 4 bar patterns, and then you'd make a menu of the order they go in, like the verse, chorus, interlude, all that stuff. So he wouldn't do any of that. He'd just get like a 2 bar beat or a groovy like, then boom, and record it. He used to run it through effects pedals, like Boss guitar pedals. That's that sort of sound and Sign of the Times, When Doves Cry. We were here in New York with guys with racks and MIDI gear. And stuff. How do we sound like Prince? And then I go out there, he's got the first model, a 6 or 7-year-old Lindrum with a few Boss stomp boxes, But the one thing he would do is if he put a track down and he didn't like the drum pattern, let's say for the chorus or something, he'd roll his chair and the autolocator over to where the Lin was, and
play it in,
and just hit the tape machine with one hand, punch. Even if it was just one bass drum you wanted, you had to see that. I wish I videoed this because it was almost unbelievable. Like he's punching in and out on the A800 with one hand and then replaying the thing. And in New York, everyone had a sync tone. It's the first thing he did when you plugged it. This is like 5 years before. If someone had brought a Lindrum to a session, the first thing I had to do was
lay the sync
down, because if they wanted to change the pattern later, we didn't do that. And
he was committing.
Yeah, but he was also still writing. But he had such an impeccable sense of time that he could. You don't want every musician doing that punching in on a Lindrum.
You don't want any musicians besides
right. He had an impeccable sense of time. But what I'm saying is his records were all very lively, and it was almost like he was in there improvising or something.
Did you do vocals with him?
Yeah, I did. I was lucky enough to actually have.
Because he usually would sit in the control room by himself.
Yes, correct.
Right.
He liked to do his vocals alone.
Right.
I probably was a little luckier because we were trying some different mics, and he had a new studio they just built, and we were trying.
So you went out to Minneapolis?
Yeah, I went out to Paisley Park Studios. His level of skill set with a microphone and what he does, his harmonies and what he did, I never saw anything like it. We basically had the microphone on a big starboard boom in front of the console, and when it came time for vocals, he'd pull it right into the middle and turn the speakers down and wear headphones.
And write lyrics on the fly?
Yes.
Yeah.
But when he was singing, like he'd do his lead, then he'd put one harmony or two. As he was going through the song, he might have a harmony that he sang, like, let's say, softly in a falsetto on the first chorus. He's going to the song, maybe the last line of that harmony on the second one, he sings out more and steps away from the mic. He does something to change it. He would, right on the 800 mode, change the tape speed to get he could do these things where he could. There was one song when I first went out there, one of the first ones I mixed, a song called Dead On It that was on the Black Album. He had these background vocals at the end, and when I put them in and pushed up the track quickly to hear what it was, I thought it was 3 females,
Oh, so he's slowing down the machine.
Yeah, but when I soloed each one, it sounded like him. It was even beyond that. He had ways of kind of twisting the
his falsetto,
harmonic and things. And we're talking about a skill set that's. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've seen guys in New York who really were on top of their game. Like whoever, Luther Vandross or Lisa Fischer, and totally on top of their game, like blow you away.
Right.
But this is a guy who's writing the songs, and he's also not only trying to get the notes in tune. He's trying to impose some personality. It was almost like a voiceover person on cartoons or something.
Yeah, right,
like he could
make.
Yeah, he could all of a sudden make like an old man or like some little kid. He could just he could do a whole track where he played the drums, overdubbed everything, do all the vocals. It sounded like a block party.
Yeah,
right.
It didn't sound like one guy doing it. It sounded like a bunch of people having fun. You know, it was.
What was Susan Rogers? She was telling us that he was like really super sensitive about breaths. That the more breath, the stuff that most people have been taught to like reduce, that was like a big part of the rhythmic music for him. That it was like part of the groove in a way, and it's just so intuitive. But so many people have gone the other way from that.
Or you get the opposite where they have breaths that are out of time and they want to turn them up. Right? Yeah, but he no.
Did you mix with him?
Well, we might need another several hours to do that. This was a guy who got his record deal right from the beginning of he had total control and could do everything. And within a short time, he had his own studio. And he never had the experience of being in New York or LA with a formalized type of, like the Clash. When I worked with them, they were super pro, but they had
Bill Price or
Sandy, Guy Stevens. They had learned through a process. They had kind of learned the studio protocol. Prince never learned the studio protocol. This was like his big Porta studio kind of thing. You know, he was very determined, very focused, but he had also learned a lot of the things that he had done before. He either mixed himself, or if the engineer was there, they were sort of helping him a little bit more, and he was diving in when they were doing it. And what ended up happening with me is either he would leave me alone and hardly interject anything, or we would be working on a song, and to find as it's going, he's turning the knobs and pushing all the buttons and doing all this thing. And then I'm trying. This was, 87 when we were doing the Love Sexy record at Paisley Park. Up until the point, he had an API console, and that was still in Studio B, but they bought an SSL. An SSL 4000 is not the kind of console for that type of artist to be turning knobs. Like, basically an API console has one more knob than your stereo, right? And you just can operate it. And the SSL has all kinds of complex stuff on it. And he was stomping the compressors too hard and things. So one day I mixed a song and he left me alone with it. He came in and said, "Oh, it's so much better than what I had, the rough mix." And then 2 days later saying, "I've been playing in my car. I like the rough mix better," because he had gotten used to hearing it and stuff. And that's the one, on one song, that's what's on the album. But like when I was sitting in an SSL console mixing the record, someone like I work with the Ramones or something, or anybody, they say, "Could you try the guitar a little brighter or something?" Then I touch the knobs. I've never seen this thing where the artist, but I mean, I'm sitting there. What am I going to say to the guy? He paid for the console, and he's Prince, right? So, what do you say?
Think you're Prince?
I think I think the first one he's Prince, and the second one is he paid for the console.
Right, exactly. But there was a lot of weirdness in that.
I bet.
A lot of it had to do with his communication. He's a little introvert, shy, or I don't know. But there were days, though, in certain times where it was just like any other guy. He was cool. He kind of let his guard down, and he was cool, and we were having fun, and we were talking, and all this.
Was there any extracurricular hang, or you were done with work?
There was no time. We weren't done with work. I passed out on the couch, or he went home and took a bath or something. There was no days off. Right? No.
And it was mostly just you and him?
Yeah. If there was a day off, he'd send me in with one of his other. He was trying to get a label off the ground. Then he had the big advance from Warner's and all. At the beginning, Prince just thought, I learned how to record in a studio and do it myself, and just let these guys go in there with Joe. And they all saw what he was doing, so they were all trying to do, and there were some things that, were kind of messy. But there's one thing about him that, to understand him, is at some point when he was a kid, he did like what everyone else did, played in bands and things. Some guy with a local studio there recognized his talent, and he used to let him go there at night. It was like an 8-track studio or something. And that's where he kind of came up with the concept. I'm going to play all the instruments and do it. He was like 16 or 17 or something, like when he did that. And then he just worked so hard. When Warner signed him, there was a demands that he's got to have total creative control. He's got, and he wants to play everything. And they liked some things they heard, but they wouldn't sign him until they brought him to LA and rented a studio and just had a bunch of executives like Russ Titleman, a bunch of people come and just
Watch
and
him.
they just watched him for like half an hour and okay, you got it. Here's a check, kind of thing.
It's also amazing that obviously he had been listening to records that had been produced. Artists had been produced. Most artists are. Stevie Wonder was produced.
Right.
And he somehow just jumped that and went. He just like blocked that out of his head and said, "I just do it." What?
Maybe he didn't realize they were being produced.
Well, how can
No,
you not?
know what?
When you're 16, maybe you're not thinking
No,
about
you look.
it.
It says produced by, and
Well, maybe he wasn't looking; he was just listening.
Maybe he wasn't 16.
You know what I think it is? He had that sort of thing of when he was growing up. He was the shortest kid in the class. His name was Prince.
Right.
And he just had this attitude of it. Like I heard stories of him, like in junior high, going to people. If someone teased him or said something to him, he'd say, "You just watch. Someday I'm going to be a big star." So this guy was on.
Yeah.
He had his
knew it
train on
early,
the track pretty early on, and he worked pretty much every breathing minute to get to where he could do all that. There were a couple of really great experiences there. One was, I told the story so many times you probably heard it, but when I went out there for my audition, he was going to try out a whole bunch of guys, and he ended up doing that over the course while I was there, which was a little weird. He was looking for a new engineer. He wanted to get a sound more competitive with that mid-'80s MTV, but he didn't realize that, you hear a keyboard part on one of these LA records or New York records that some guy spent half a day with MIDI racks, trying to get this huge keyboard. And Prince would look at this, keyboard he had and then just to hit a preset and play. We were making a different kind of record, but he was still trying to find a way to sell more, and he was listening to ones that were at the top of the Billboard charts and trying to figure out how to. So I go in there, and I don't meet him. I go there. Brand new complex. My friend Sal Greco, who's the guy who hired me at Electric Lady, who I replaced about a couple months later, he helped build this Paisley Park facility. And he was out there, and they were looking for engineers. I was one of the first ones they flew out. And I got there. It was early evening, some point in November '87. They showed me around this place. First off, things like Record Plant, Electric Lady, they're tiny compared to Paisley Park. He had a full sound stage, like 2 studios, rehearsal, offices, and they were still adding on. At the time, he didn't live there when I was there. He had a house nearby. So they bring me into Studio A with this brand new, very similar to the Studio B at Electric Lady. Brett Daney designed Westlake room with a 4-way monitor, Studers, a brand new SSL, the rack with all the cool toys, everything. And there's a tape on the machine. They said, okay, he wants you to do a mix, So I start to push up the faders on this song, and it was a live band track that had done prior to building this Paisley Park. He had basically a studio in his house in his basement that he did all the drum machine stuff or overdubbing and mixing. And then at the band's rehearsal, they had a little Soundcraft with an MCI. So they basically just ran a splitter off whatever they were doing and didn't really monitor or do it. They just sort of could make a multi-track recording of whatever was happening at any given time. So I get this tape and I'm pushing up things, and I get to the lead vocal track. I push it up, and there's like a 60-cycle hum. And basically, the splitter or whatever, that track on the tape recorder didn't record the vocal.
Oh, there was no vocal.
There was no vocal, right? But the song had these stops, da-da-bum, and there was like a rest for a bar. And he was screaming something or doing something, and that got through the monitors into the overheads. But as soon as I heard this, the first thing I did was I went to somebody who was working at the studio there. It was like at night. They left me with like the guy at the front desk and this big vast thing, no assistant. So I go to the front desk and I say, "Can you check if this is the right song? I don't think it's the right song." So I go back in the control room. The guy comes walking in, and about 2 minutes later, he goes, "It's the right song. He wants you to mix it. There's no lead vocal." So I treated it like when I was in New York. I'd been doing those records with people like some DJs or people like Arthur Baker or T. Scott, some of the Def Jam stuff, where you were doing 12-inch or very, like you'd always do an instrumental B-side, remember, with the delays and stuff, before you had MIDI to replace everything, you try to make something out of what was there that didn't sound like what was there, so to speak. It was a very good track. The band was killing, and I made it so when it got to these stops, I had the vocals molted on another 2 channels, and I turned them up with a ton of gain, a certain EQ, so you could hear his voice was present in these
in the stops.
Yeah. And then other than that, I put weird delays, kind of like the This Is Radio Clash approach. You know, just put a bunch of shit. And I walked out of there. I spent most of the night. I was there. I started like around 7 or 8 at night. And it's kind of like around 5 or 6. I walked out of there, but during the night at about 4 a.m. I'm sitting there mixing, and he comes walking right through the control room door with no people, nobody to introduce us, wearing the coolest clothes you ever saw in your life, like this flowered shirt and stuff. And he
pajamas.
Says, yeah, you know, he always had high heels on. I never saw him without them. And I don't think I ever saw him wear the same outfit twice. They were always making him new ones. You know, it was like crazy. It was really crazy, man. So he walked in, and when he walks in, he says, "Oh, I'm just looking for a cassette label. I don't want to interrupt you, you know. I don't want to hear it till you're done, you know." But at the same time, I think he was putting pressure on me because I was probably spending too much time, you know. I was trying to figure out what do I do with this damn thing, you know. So a couple hours later, I went out, and they sent the cassette over to his house. I went back to my hotel. I remember at that time, I was thinking to myself, what's going on here? What am I, you know? And I was trying to convince myself because I look so, you know, he was my favorite artist at the time. You know, I think I played the Sign of the Times album more than any other album the year before. And that was a cool thing. Like when I went out there, I kind of felt like there's nobody else on this stone, you know, that we float around the sun on.
Did you feel pressure because of that?
No, I didn't. Sure, I felt pressure. Yeah, but no, I was comfortable with that. I was kind of thinking this guy might be crazy enough that we work good together or something. You know, it was sort of like that. It was good, but
it's well put.
Anyway, I did this thing. I didn't know what to think of what I did, if it was even a record or anything. A lot of times those 12-inch B-sides we did didn't make any sense
like
either.
Jams,
it was more like if people were dancing and they were on drugs, they liked them. But it wasn't like you wouldn't listen to them in your home stereo, you know, you listen. So we made this thing, and they sent it to him, and I got back to my hotel, and I was really tired, you know, because I think I had a mastering session the day before at like 10 a.m. in New York, and I got on a plane and worked, you know, been up at that point almost 20 hours. I was really tired, and I'm thinking, trying to talk myself up like, it's okay, you tried your best, man. Thinking I'm going to be going to the airport in an hour or two, and they don't want to see me again, you know, from this thing I did. And I go into my hotel. I don't know how they got the cassette over to him that quick or whatever, you know, but I get the phone's ringing. Clink. He loves it. They want you back at the studio. You know, okay, like now? Yeah, okay. So I go back. And he's got another song he wants me to mix, and they put the tape. They already had the tape up.
Did he say anything about the lack of vocal?
I told the people that there was no vocals, so it had to be the wrong song. And he said, no, that's the right song. But he never made any comment about what I did. I never heard that song again.
Right.
I think he wanted to throw me right away into a very compromised situation. Let's see what this guy can do here. And half of it was probably the fact that I didn't melt down and I actually handed him something.
Right.
You know, at the end of it, because I know guys that I've thought about this for many years after that. I was like,
well, that's why I asked you if you were nervous, because I would not even got off the plane.
I would have jumped out the window. There's no vocal.
You know, so no, I didn't discover this till I was there. I never heard this song before. Right. You know, I was there. I actually spent already about an hour like balancing the drums and things, and I heard the vocal in the PA.
So you thought it was there?
I thought, oh, there's a vocal on this. Yeah, of course. That we usually put vocals on records when they're songs that aren't instrumentals. You know, he never wanted to put it out or listen to it or anything. It was strictly something like, I'm going to give you something that had
challenge. It
was a challenge. Yeah, it was one of those.
And I assume you didn't make a copy for yourself.
No.
Can you hear it in your head?
That first song, yeah, I can. Yeah. So, right after I got back to the studio, it's like 9 a.m. or something. I'd been up for almost a day, and they had this other song they wanted me to mix, and then this one was actually a song that was going to go on the Black album. He had mixed it already, and but he didn't play me the rough mix or anything. He'd mixed it already, and he wanted it to be mixed better for the album, which was about to go to mastering like the next day or something. So they expected me to start right then, and I had to say, is it possible I could take a nap? Because I've been up 24 hours, and so I went back to this motel, slept like 3 or 4 hours, went back, and I worked on it, a song called Dead on It. And that one I actually was able to, print a time code and use the SSL computer. And he left me alone, just did it all night. And basically there were two basses on it, like a synth bass and a sort of a slap bass that he played on a bass guitar. And I think I made the whole thing sound a lot better. And what he had, I didn't hear as rough. He didn't give it to me. But I had sort of decided that the synth bass was the main one. The other thing was just sort of accent. So when I finished it, he came in and he said, I don't like it at all. And then I thought I was fired, And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, listen to my rough, And I listened to it and I could hear right away what
the difference.
Yeah, I could hear right away. It was just a conceptual thing of what I chose. I realized right away that there was this one glaring discrepancy about what his concept and what I just sort of guessed was the concept. So I said, can you give me just like 10 minutes here? I think I know what to do. And I just pushed the, slap bass up where he had and pulled the own down. I tried to adjust a few other things around that. And he came in and he loved it. So we finished it. That's on the Black album.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. But do you think that the situation that he put you in, that it was all deliberate on his part?
Yeah.
That he really knew what
he knew that he worked long hours and he
Right.
drove engineers nuts, and
Right.
that he was like kind of like,
can this guy take
let's
it?
start this. Let's like
get right to it.
It's that stress test they have for people with heart attack. Like
Yeah,
we'll put them
sure.
on this treadmill. If they drop dead, they have a bad heart. That kind of thing. So after I finished that, he wasn't very talkative. He says, "Oh, yeah, he was really happy. He's like dancing around. So yeah, that's it." And he didn't say, "Could you turn up that one thing, this or anything?" It was really weird. Like. The communication thing with him was either he would sort of sit there and do a rough mix, or I would, if he left the room, I would kind of solo channels and fix things or something. Or I realized early on he was maybe going to use the rough. In New York, the record was divided where you didn't mix till you're sure you had a good vocal and everything. Studio time was expensive. You wouldn't even start a mix until you thought everything was done. Here's a guy who would sit down with the drum machine, then all of a sudden there's a guitar, a bass, two keyboards, a lead electric guitar with an amp, and 3 or 4 tracks of vocals, and about 3 hours have elapsed. You know what I mean? It's like, boom.
Gear Club Podcast is sponsored by Eventide, and they're running a special promotion just for Gear Club listeners. You can go to store.eventideaudio.com and use the promo code GearClub15 for 15% off your purchase of Eventide products. Some exclusions may apply. Go to GearClubPodcast.com for details. Big thanks to Eventide for their sponsorship and the special promotion.
For extras from the episodes, like playlists, links, and videos, head over to GearClubPodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and come say hi and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Gear Club Podcast. Thanks for listening.
And please, if you like what you hear, let us know and leave a review.